Hi, my name's Lily, and I am a first generation child from Barbados, the Caribbean.
So, how did you feel when you first arrived to the UK? What you can remember?
I do remember being on a ship, and I do remember my sister being very small in my mother's arms because she was months old, and I had an older sister with me. And I remember ending up in Victoria Station before we got a cab to where we were going to stay. And that's where we met our father as well, because our father had come over to prepare and to get somewhere for us to live. I remember the song Downtown that was playing on the cab's radio as well before we got to the flat.
Wow. And so Granddad was already there, and you have like these key moments, these little snapshots that you remember.
Yes.
And when you moved and you were living in Northwest London, how did you navigate the issues related to your identity and your cultural background as a West Indian person settling here in the UK?
When we first came over, we were in Kilburn, but then as our family grew, and I had 3 brothers that was left in the Caribbean. So when they came over, there was a need for space. And my father was working on the railway at the time, as many people from the Caribbean was at that time. And so we moved to a flat, a house in Primrose Hill, which was massive, not many rooms, but very, very big, beautiful house.
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up. And the difference is that in Kilburn, which was a very Irish population, to move into Primrose Hill, which was predominantly white and middle class. And I went to a school I was at one point the only Black child in the school. And then as the years went on, there was 2 more.
Yeah.
So my experience was, I didn't go into a Black community straight away. I was in a very white community and made friends in that community. But because my father worked for the railway, many of the people who worked for the railway lived in the same street as us, and they were Black families. Literally every other 3 houses, there was families, and they were all from Barbados as well, for the most part. So we settled. So I had my community there, and I had my community in the community in the white area in the school.
So it was like 2 parallel worlds.
Your
British Bajan community, and then your school, very English, white, middle class community.
Yeah.
And what about experiences of racism or discrimination? Did they come up? I mean, I'm guessing so. And if so, how did you personally and the family deal with them?
I think the significant incident for me was at school. And as I told you, at that point, I think I was the only Black child in the school. And so there wasn't any threat around me, really, because I was, there wasn't lots of us.
Yeah.
But there was this underlying kind of discrimination, racism, and it came because I was working with a couple of twins one day, because they were like monitors. And I remember one of them saying to me, "You're different. You're different from other Black people." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm just like everyone else." Yeah. And I was like, "What does that really mean?" I said, "All my family are Black, so what does that mean?" And from that day, I realized that actually no one ever spoke about it, but that was how I got to know that I was different in a way, because I wasn't treated differently up until that point. That put something in my mind. And then I started researching and spent a lot of time reading about Black power. I became obsessed, actually.
Yeah, I think most Black and brown people have that moment where you realize you're a person of color. you know, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6. And you definitely raised us with a strong empowerment and a strong confidence around being Black, around being Caribbean, around having African heritage. And in 2020, we spoke a lot about the racism that we were seeing in police brutality. So from then till now, do you think the attitudes towards immigration and diversity has changed?
There have been changes. You know, obviously, we're more likely to see representation on TV. With the expansion of the net, you can actually connect with people in a very different way. But in terms of institutional racism, which I think is the most powerful thing, I don't think it's changed that much. You know, I think, well, the mere fact that we can talk about George Floyd in the 21st century, it tells you a lot. And that came from an institutional point of view. It was the police. And I think I've met so many people, because as a therapist, I do work with a lot of people of color. And there's very few people I've met who've not experienced something, particularly in work, where they've had to kind of defend themselves against, you know, microaggression or not being promoted, or, you know, racism, institutional racism.
And there's so much to say. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2, I think. But the last question I just wanted to ask is, as I said, you've made sure that me and my sisters feel very proud to be West Indian, and I feel very honoured to be a descendant of the Windrush generation. So finally, what positive do you feel you can take from your experience of migration?
I asked my father before he passed away why he brought me to England, because I was like, you know, I mean, I may have had a completely different life had I stayed in Barbados. And he explained that he came here to, you know, better himself and to help his family, and to make sure that we had an education and that we were successful. And I know behind it was about progression. So that bravery, leaving somewhere that you know and bringing all 6 children over to the UK, is for me was a positive. My parents were intelligent and able and worked really hard, and they showed us, you know, the values of hard work, and they showed us all the positive in a very sometimes hostile environment. And I am so proud of them, and also proud of who I am and my heritage, you know, Afro-Caribbean, because I very much identify with my African roots. That awareness of who we were in the first place, the fact that they kept their traditions, they cooked their food, they never denied their heritage and, you know, their color, and the proudness they felt about being who they are. So even in a hostile environment, you know, we were able to survive in a good way, survive the difficulties, and came out the other side, which enabled me to then do exactly that with my children.
Gosh, shout out Gran and Granddad. Literally, their legacy lives on. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't half of the things that I'm doing now, even teaching Caribbean dance, even feeling so connected to my culture, feeling comfortable to go back to Barbados and the other islands. Is a big thanks to them. But thank you, Mum, for answering these questions.
Well,
it's been lovely to hear, and I hope everyone who watches just gets a little bit of insight into the experiences of the Windrush generation.